dried before it was repainted. Skywalker was menacing, not just with a new mask, but with a new saber. Maul had taken on an instructor role with Anakin, and it led to him killing a Jedi Temple guard, who presented a crossguard lightsaber. It was during this kill that Anakin tried to bleed the weapon, but failed. The hilt of the weapon was actually fine, but the crystal inside was bled by an unstable individual. Anakin, despite feeling rage over the loss of his wife, felt even more confused because of his trajectory with Maul. His rage was overshadowed by regret, and therefore, it was impossible to fully bend the crystal to its will. Anakin and Vader didn't want to fully bend either, and a major part of that was the difference between Maul and Sidious. Without having to use life support, a voice modulator, and have a tube shoved down his throat all the time, he was able to relax, let go of the darkness. His metallic limbs were comfortable, not overbearing and impossible to use. Anakin's life was relatively peaceful as a result. He functioned as an asset of Crimson Dawn, working to make sure the criminal syndicate could weed out slave labor, which did work. Instead of Sidious as a master, he had Maul as a brother. That's what the former Sith Zabrak wanted as was. He was the teacher and he had the quote-unquote power, but above all else, he was searching for connection. Anakin replaced Savage, and from that replacement, they both gained brotherhood. The forging of the Cortosis mask and forum covers were just a step in the right direction. Due to the disappearance, or what Sidious believed was the death of Skywalker, the Sith and Empire needed enforcers. The Inquisitors had to be trained by the Emperor himself, and he was forced to train them to their full potential. Without it, the Jedi could return with a vengeance. This led to Maul and Vader interacting with the Inquisitors on a few occasions, but none of it led to Sidious finding out who was behind it, because there were no witnesses. The Inquisitors traveled in duos, and no one was a match for Maul or a recovered Skywalker. On the other side of interactions with the Empire, Anakin had come up with a chance to take control over a new Imperial initiative placed by Vice Admiral Rampart. The Empire forced every citizen to use chain codes, and so, with some genius ingenuity, Anakin and a few other pirates in the Syndicate were able to siphon money away from upper-class people into their hands. This wasn't some Robin Hood BS. This was criminals stealing money to fund more crimes. The Empire wasn't able to stop it, because to everyone, it looked like they were stealing the money from the upper class. It wouldn't be picked up by a news station, because cities controlled the media, but through word of mouth, people were learning that others were losing money through chain codes. The reason this wasn't reported was because the Empire couldn't prove that the chain codes were being stolen by pirates or criminals. It just looked like the Empire was stealing the credits and using it for themselves. This gave Crimson Dawn more leeway financially, and therefore, the chance to stop using slave labor. Though there was something else that aided with this labor issue. Due to the Empire losing a critical enforcer in Vader, instead of genuinely taking his time to try and find Anakin, the Empire got to the battleships of the CIS Reserve Fleet later. This gave Anakin, an individual who gave the shutdown command to the entire droid army, a chance to relocate it. A majority of these forces had been destroyed by the clones, but Sidious had lost time, and in that lost time, Crimson Dawn seized an opportunity. They now had an official navy, one that was tiny in comparison to the Empire, but it was even more prepared militaristically than any other navy owned by any other syndicate. With Crimson Dawn's position in the Outer Rim as a group that kind of unified the other syndicates, they couldn't really start a conflict with any one of them. Yet, the larger ones were secured allies, so there was real potential for the smaller groups to be targeted. There were hundreds of miniature cartels, kingpins, pirate guilds, and so forth that had territory worth taking. Everyone had to eat, and if Crimson Dawn could secure more profit for themselves, then more would be willing to join them. Maul's aspirations were for a grander criminal network that could challenge Palpatine. If they didn't secure the core, then fine. If they didn't capture Kuat or Coruscant, then fine. But by the Force, they were going to make sure Sidious died, an elongated and painful death. He deserved to suffer for what they had been put through. After a full year or so of working together, the next race already stays pleasant.
Everybody treats me like a privilege.
Together, Anakin and Maul were truly connected as brothers. What started as a vengeance on Palpatine and lust for revenge on Maul transformed into a true brotherhood. It was ironic. Maul had only the intention to use Skywalker as a tool, but as they spent more time together, they realized that their bond was much more important. Through training, in battle, or silence and congregation, the two, connected by fate, were driven to be each other's biggest motivators. When they trained, they honed their skills. They excessively challenged the other to be a better competitor. Whether it was Skywalker or Maul who lost a spar, they found room to improve on both ends. They were truly a remarkable duo, because every day was a step forward, and as Anakin healed from his wounds on Mustafar, he became more imbued with skills equatable to what he should be as the Chosen One. Anakin's growth wasn't just inspiration for the future, it was a true certification that they could change the galaxy together. Crimson Dawn was the growing empire, and like the Jedi of old, the criminal syndicates around the Outer Rim were complacent. Their empire was the one with direction and inspired to change the future for themselves, while the Hutt's Black Suns and Pike Syndicate waited idly in their power, hoping to have higher returns annually. Crimson Dawn challenged the mighty empire. With two duelists capable of fighting off enforcers, it was much easier for them anyways. Though, with a full year having gone by, something became more apparent. Sidious was impatient. Actions mandated by the Imperial Senate and by the Emperor's office proved that he was frustrated. Inquisitors were killed every other month, and the threat of the Jedi was continuously growing. There were 100 or so unaccounted for Jedi after Order 66, and following a year of inquisitorious action, the number was down to a remarkable 85 or so. The numbers fluctuated frequently, but the Jedi had time to rally together and multiply. Sidious was actually hoping that Maul could become his lead enforcer, but he too was impossible to locate. This was semi-ironic, due to the nature of Crimson Dawn's criminal activities. Maul preferred to be on his throne, mostly on Dathomir, but he never was, because Anakin kept him in the flow. The two of them, separately usually, went to Imperial outposts and raided everything. Crimson Dawn would steal technology, free prisoners and slaves, as well as kill off Imperial personnel, so Sidious's hopes were actually directly in front of him all the time. The Empire had huge recruitment numbers after Order 66, but they stagnated with outlying attacks across the expansion territory. Crimson Dawn was unstoppable in these raids, and very infrequently were there survivors of these attacks. Due to the criminal empire freeing slaves, especially with the employment of retrofitted Clone War battle droids, Crimson Dawn saw their own recruitment numbers soar. People were willing to serve thanks in part to the humanity they were shown by the Syndicate. Many of these people have been passed around between the other dynasties, so to have one that actually valued their humanity or sentience was a breath of fresh air to them, thus bringing in their loyalty. These Crimson Dawns became more common, and thus, Sidious brought all of his Inquisitors back to Coruscant, so that he could complete their training. The issue is, due to the attacks themselves and reported rebel activity from insurgents like Saw Gerrera, Sidious was left to assume that the Jedi had formed a coalition of rebels. Crimson Dawn was a concern of the outer edges of Imperial territory, but based on trends and statistics, criminal syndicates left the Republic alone. Why would they target a more powerful empire, one that could militaristically wipe all of them off the map? So in full belief that the Jedi were behind these attacks, Sidious prepared to exterminate these foes once and for all. The last of the clone army was sent to the Outer Rim, to be expendable, as the new TK stormtroopers were filled into Imperial base across the Mid and Inner Rim. The Inquisitors would be prepared to stop this rising movement. One attribute that Maul particularly liked about Crimson Dawn, as he retrofitted his brotherhood with Anakin, was the militaristic side. He hoped that by uniting the other syndicates, he might militarize enough to challenge the ruling galactic powers. But following Mandalore, he realized he needed more. If the Mandalorians could be sent running by a couple clones and a failed Jedi prospect, then perhaps he needed more able-bodied soldiers. Sure, it was a negligent perspective of the events during the siege, but he saw failure. Therefore, no reason to continue it. And the main reason Crimson Dawn had so much success against the Empire was due to Anakin and himself being present, something he wouldn't have discovered without Anakin being by his side and encouraging him to go into combat on the front lines. The battleships of the CIS Navy were also a step in the right direction, because despite being commanded by sentients loyal to, hired, or employed by the Syndicate, they were able to capture decommissioned vessels from the Republic Navy. This wasn't a major concern to Imperial officials, because they assumed that these ships were being stolen for scrap value. But it was also something Palpatine didn't know about. Thanks to Anakin's desire to set up racketeering within Imperial lines, most officers who reported to local mobs in the Outer Rim territories were paid off. So they gave very basic and unfulfilling data reports.
I'm about to go snow Sanborn and Chili. Let's go do something. Let's go. What was that?
That wretched order will rue the day they betrayed me and
You think you know something about Clash Royale?
Bro, I know everything.
Who's this character?
That's Musketeer. That's nice. Mini Hector, obviously. Spirit Goblin. Ooh, that was one of my favorites.
This one?
The Wizard.
This one.
Electro Spirit. Bro, you gotta give me the challenge, man. I know all these.
Okay, man, let's get some harder ones then. This one?
Oh, Rider.
Kind of Hog Rider. What about this one?
Glitch.
This one?
Dark Prince.
This one.
Battle Him. Dark Goblin. Staffy.
What the heck, man?
I told you, I know everything, man. Stop playing with me.
Okay, man, last level, there's no way you're getting Anki. Who is this one?
Nerf Fighter. Lumberjacks. Kitchen. Mighty.
Bro, what? We're gonna do one more. To get this right, I'm gonna give you $100. Who is this one?
I can't even think
No. What a horrible way to lose $100. Why would you just say his name?
I have my principles.
Wonder who that is? Download Clash Royale and find out.
Inferior.
To the superiors, no Moth knew about stolen Venators or Activators, and because all worker affairs went through the same offices as these paid-off officers, there was nowhere for the information to go. It sat on desks, collected dust, and was completely forgotten about. And even funnier, with a larger navy, Crimson Dawn didn't have the personnel to fill the bridges of any of these vessels, let alone fully crew any number of them. But they had a navy that could be used when they had the personnel. That was the benefit also of the Separatist Navy. Most of the controls were designed to be interconnected and self-operated. So, if the sentient crew and or captain lost control of the operating droids, they could take control over the ship without much of a problem if they had 3 or 4 sentient people on board. This afforded Crimson Dawn a massive navy that could be used if they had more manpower. Regardless of how positive things seemed for Anakin as a joint leader of a criminal organization, he still held deep resentment for Obi-Wan. He couldn't forgive him because every time Maul spoke, he wished death upon that man. It was one of the anchoring similarities between the two of them, and it was the irony of having a criminal organization based in the Outer Rim. Anakin had been on Tatooine a number of times, but he never heard or saw an Obi-Wan Kenobi. He considered visiting the Lars, but they had only brought him pain. No need to open old scars, in his opinion. It was at this point, 2.5 years following the fall of the Republic, that Maul wanted to make a move. He had realized that Crimson Dawn's aspirations would never come from direct war with the Empire. The only way they could find more power was in conquering the Outer Rim. With full control over it, they might have a chance at actually building a military force. So instead of going directly to war, they would catch Sidious off guard and go from there. He told Anakin that they could kill Sidious and watch the Imperial structure cave in on itself. Once Palpatine was dead, they could expand across the Outer Rim and watch the Empire implode from a distance. Perhaps once that was finished, they could have enough manpower to strike the Imperial regime. It was a valid idea. Crimson Dawn had amassed a sizable navy, including several Clone War-era vessels, and their military force was the largest of the other major syndicates. Without slave labor and freeing those who were once slaves, a large coalition of loyalists formed around the criminal organization, as battle droids did the slave labor. Thanks in part to the Imperial officers on their payroll, Maul and Anakin had a secured passage to find Sidious at any given time. As it turned out, he was commemorating the creation of a new super base out by Naboo. It was the first of its kind, and it was meant to deter these attacks from happening. Sidious chose near Naboo to appease the people of his homeworld, which that did work. This, of course, also helped him fund a larger military. Thousands of TK stormtroopers were gathered up for this, and at the landing pad was Darth Sidious, guarded by his 6 royal guards. The Imperial officer who got transport to Maul and Anakin was paid very well. As per their plans, they waited for the Dark Lord to actually make it into the base, where he was meant to hold a presser for the people of the galaxy to see. Proof that the Empire was stronger than the Republic, and so on and so forth. Maul and Anakin hid within the complex, and waited to spring their trap. This would be Dawn's first true strength against the Empire. With 3 Imperial 1 Star Destroyers in orbit, they'd be tasked with destroying the fleet and penetrating the base, while their leaders killed a Sith Lord. What they didn't know was that Grand Inquisitor and his 9th sister were also here. They were the most powerful of the Inquisitors, guarding their Emperor. Once Maul and Anakin had Sidious in a trap, they locked the entire facility down, cutting all of his power off after booby-trapping the Sith Lord. Sidious, once again, believed Jedi, and activated the 2 Inquisitors. Despite having the jump on Palpatine, Anakin and Maul were completely blindsided by the 9th Sister and Grand Inquisitor. 4 Crimson Sabers dropped down. Maul shoved Anakin to the side and rolled away, igniting his staff and thrusting forward at Grand Inquisitor. The hulking 9th Sister charged at Anakin, who rolled to the side, igniting his cross guard. He defended the strike that launched him backwards. The massive Inquisitor had him playing super defensive until he could find her weak spots. He saw Maul slash forward aggressively, as Anakin himself slid across the pristine floors and used the wall as momentum, launching himself back at the sister. She defended herself, and he spun around, clocking her saber and defending another strike. He stepped back, parrying and sliding forward. Her blade hit the side piece of the cross guard, the perfect use of the weapon. But she activated the spin cycle, forcing Anakin to avoid the strike and prepare for another barrage. Maul and Grand Inquisitor were trading blows when he sensed Sidious's arrival to their location. He thrust the Palpatine Inquisitor into the wall and grabbed him by the throat before cutting through the blade he used. Maul turned his attention towards Palpatine's presence. When he saw the cloaked man, he scratched his face in frustration before plunging his own saber into Grand Inquisitor.
Big black little boy here.
Sidious encouraged him to come alone, but he wouldn't. The fully trained 9th Sister thought she had Skywalker, but he was just warming up the entire time. A good way to be prepared for Sidious. He slipped her strike and used her own saber to kill her. He shoved the body of the massive creature into the ground before getting by Maul's side. Sidious was right there, lurking, but with a heinous grin. His yellow eyes lighting the corridor, and his hands reached for his sleeves. Sidious spoke delicately, but with such intensity that it echoed across the halls. The royal guards activated their pikes, as Sidious told the 2 former apprentices that staying dead would have saved them their time. The guardsmen rushed forward, and Anakin ripped his hand back towards himself, pulling all of them from their feet and allowing Maul to spin through their bodies, decapitating all 6. Brothers stood side by side and readied themselves. Sidious ignited 2 weapons and slid forward, forcing Anakin and Maul to move to either side of the halls. Above the system, dozens of Clone War-era vessels dropped out of hyperspace. The Imperial fleet, which was facing the star system itself, was completely out of position and had to completely turn around to face the incoming fleet. The Crimson Dawn fighters pressed forward, and their ground troops made a move to the surface. Blaster fire covered the skies over the planet, as Imperial personnel inside the base were informed of the attack. Due to the weakness of the Star Destroyers, the overwhelming fighter attack from the pirate fleet completely disabled their abilities. The few CIS ships and Venators fired away, and raised their shields to protect themselves from the incoming barrage. Inside the base, where explosions rattled the corridors, sabers collided. Anakin and Maul knew that to beat a foe like Sidious, they needed to be at their best. Skywalker shoved forward and Maul did too. Palpatine avoided their strikes and they slammed into one another. Maul saw the equation play out and forced Anakin behind him as he whipped around and defended 2 strikes from Sidious, lifting his saber above his head. The Sith Lord's weapon bursted and deignited over the weapon. Palpatine looked down with confusion before using his other saber to defend himself. Because with Maul's pride, he couldn't cover his body with any cortosis, but Anakin was able to convince him to put some in the middle of his lightsaber hilt, because it was an easy target, and it would determine life or death for him. It was agreed upon, making the hilt of his saber as indestructible as the dark saber. He launched himself at Sidious, who moved back angrily, waiting for his other saber to activate again. He defended each strike as former master and apprentices crossed blades across the halls. Anakin got to his feet and rushed down it, using his crossguard as a spear and lobbing it past Maul. avoided the throw. Palpatine, luckily, pulled back just in time. Anakin leapt up for the saber and slid across the ground, grabbing it and throwing it above his head, catching Sidious's saber in the cross of the hilt, just like he did the Night Sister. Maul jumped past Anakin and threatened Sidious as he ignited his second weapon. Their weapons were speedily traded blows, and Maul, festering with anger, knew that this was his chance. Sidious punched Maul in the abdomen and cut across his head, removing one of his horns. Maul wounds before being electrocuted into the wall. Sidious grinned, and before he could finish off the Zaprak, Anakin lifted him from his feet. Their weapons spun around, defending and striking, each one going to the kill, changing between defense and offense every other second. Sidious found his mark, and as he was going for it, Anakin thrusted his head into the blade of the saber, breaking it apart. Palpatine was shocked by such a jarring move, but he avoided the counter, and just as he wheeled around to kill Skywalker, his blade hit Anakin's forearm, bursting his other saber apart. Anakin gripped Palpatine with a metallic hand, and lobbed the saber into his stomach. Maul looked up, and all he could see was Anakin jabbing his weapon again and again and again. Sidious was still alive, feeding off the pain, but he couldn't do anything. His chest had been crushed in on itself, and he was being stabbed in the abdomen every other second. Anakin shoved Sidious to the ground, and that was an indicator to Maul that he could finish this off, which is what he did. While the brothers wanted to cherish this moment, they had a base to destroy. Dozens of pirate gunships had already landed, completely blindsided the TK troopers on the side of the base. They fired back, but the approaching men and women were starving for another victory. The Imperial troopers didn't have the same drive, and their morale was crushed, seeing that the super base's defenses weren't operating. Maul and Anakin were also cutting through whatever command staff was present inside the base. They took out the command center operation post, and a couple other checkpoints throughout the structure. The best part for them was they were split up. Anakin and Maul didn't need to be around each other for this part, and the TKs were incredibly easy and satisfying to kill. Within hours, the base would be completely taken over, and instead of capturing it, the pirates took the ammunition, supplies, the credits, and whatever else of value they could find. There were orders to steal TK armor so they could raid more Imperial settlements, which was done per instruction. The death of the Emperor would prove to Anakin and Maul that neither of them wanted to capture Imperial territory. The structure of the Imperial regime crumbled in on itself. The Senate was weak, and with officers holding more power than senators, it was easy for power-obsessed individuals to become aggressive and eventually violent. For Crimson Dawn, this meant an all-out war on the Outer Rim, one that would eventually lead to a very important reunion on Tatooine. Maul had tasked Skywalker would destroy the Hutt Syndicate on Tatooine because of what they had done to his family, and of course Anakin being from the Dust Bowl. It was Skywalker's chance to close off yet another chapter in his life, as he and Maul moved closer and closer to total Outer Rim dominance. After gutting Jabba, killing his son, and burning the palace to the ground, he roamed the streets, slaughtering slavers as he did. As Anakin walked through those streets, wearing his suit, he saw a familiar face in a crowd of onlookers. It led to him pressing further. Obi-Wan, at this point, was working as a dishwasher in a kitchen. His shift was over, and he stumbled into the sight of the Crimson Dawn posse, imprisoning or killing slavers. Kenobi wouldn't save them, because they didn't deserve it, frankly, but also because he was hiding until the time was right to train Luke. Kenobi made a shifty escape before being caught by Vader. Having already buried his own and Anakin's lightsabers in the sand, Obi-Wan was completely defenseless. Anakin ignited his crimson saber and shoved it towards Kenobi's face, threatening him as he asked if he knew who he was. Obi-Wan truthfully didn't. Having cut himself off from the Force, he couldn't sense the identity, just assuming he was another Inquisitor. Anakin slipped his helmet off of his head and revealed the still scarred and burnt face of the apprentice Kenobi let burn to death on Mustafar. Shock and sadness covered Obi-Wan's face.
Let's check it out.
He had regretted his actions so much for the past 5 or 6 years, and here they were, facing him. Anakin sensed this and was taken.
I need gas money, but I don't get paid till next week. What should I do?
You're gonna have to get paid early, get into pay. No interest,
Stand, buddy.
check.
Don't want to end up as
Download Earn It.
Oh, hello. Protect me.
Because he believed Obi-Wan's intentions had been malicious. Their rage, their readiness, the determination to kill his former master had dissipated in mere moments. Obi-Wan's eyes watered as he asked if it was really Anakin, the boy he had trained. Skywalker nodded his head, fearing what came next. This wasn't the same Vader that was pushed into darkness by Sidious. This was a conscious man, living a life of his own choice, serving with another brother on a quest to make the Empire irrelevant, while also adding some positive change to the galaxy. His hate fueled most of his actions, and they almost did, but here they were, for the first time since before Obi-Wan left for Utapau. All those years ago, it was Obi-Wan telling Anakin how proud of him he was, and now it was Kenobi telling Vader something he had spent what felt like a lifetime pondering. He started with a truly heartfelt apology, expressing to Anakin that he was sorry for everything, for allowing him to fall down that path. It was truly the burden of every master to carry their students' faults, and Obi-Wan certainly felt them with Anakin. He told Anakin that he never wanted any of this for him. He only wanted him to have the life he desired, forgetting obvious hints of his secret relationship with Padme, doing what he could to make Ahsoka become his student. All of it was love, and he had hoped that he wouldn't have to kill him on Mustafar. But a part of him had wished that even after Mustafar's offense, that they could speak again, so that he could tell Anakin that if he was given a second chance in life, he would have given his life so that Qui-Gon could have instructed him the way that was needed, so that Anakin wouldn't have to suffer the pain he endured in his 23 years of life. These were his failures and his burdens, ones that Anakin wore on his body for no good reason. This left Anakin emotional as he reached for his mask still in his hand and apologized himself. Part of him wanted revenge for so long, and he wanted it because his brother wanted it too. Now he was unsure of what he himself wanted, and thus, his apology to Obi-Wan was for destroying everything his master loved. But Kenobi never blamed him. It had always been his own burden to bear, and he told Anakin to finish what he must. He raised his lightsaber hilt, and before he could ignite it, the weapon slipped from his hand.
Something here.
He told Obi-Wan that he couldn't. The two of them stood apart for several seconds, without a word to be said. And maybe that's how it should be. But slowly they came together to embrace each other. Others lost to the wind, finally reunited on the planet where it all started. Obi-Wan considered telling Anakin about Luke, but he couldn't muster the words. They sat stuck in his throat. When they parted, they'd be yet another regret to add to Obi-Wan's list. But that didn't mean father and son would never meet. Eventually they would. But long before that came, much would change. Anakin would never tell Maul of his interaction with Kenobi, and instead confirm that Tatooine was an Obi-Wan-cleared system. Crimson Dawn would become the ruling power of the desert world and across the Outer Rim, but their influence didn't stop at their controlled territory. Following a number of rebellions within the Empire, including a clone trooper uprising and insurgency from Mandalore, the system Palpatine built around himself would fumble out of control. The power they had wasn't much without its leader, and no matter the politician, they couldn't handle it. The death of the Imperial regime came with coalitions aligning and splitting. What Maul had never been trained became an attribute necessary for the dominant power of the Outer Rim. Because the criminal organization, while stealing and corrupting, wasn't the worst thing in the galaxy. They didn't harbor slaves, and the only infighting came from formerly powerful families and cartels. Aside from that, it was a more peaceful regime than the imperial states that mostly existed in the core. With a powerful military but no structure, the Empire caved and caved, until it was just but a coalition of Coruscant, Corellia, and Chandrilia. It was a fading power, and with the reach of Crimson Dawn established within every single rising collection of systems across the galaxy, they had the chance to establish themselves as an economic powerhouse. Without a care for politics and seeing more purpose in fulfilling his own life, especially after his encounter with Obi-Wan, Anakin decided to step down from Crimson Dawn. This angered Maul greatly, but he was able to relinquish his frustration once Anakin explained that he would always be there for his brother. He just needed more out of his life. Battles and conquests have been a part of his life since the Clone Wars. Maul had the empire he needed, While the former Sith wasn't about making things wholesome, he was understanding, and gave Skywalker as many credits as were needed. Anakin was a Crimson Dawn legend, the enslaver of slavers. People around the Outer Rim would adore him, no matter where he went. Anakin, on this separation from Maul, would eventually find Ahsoka, and their reunion would be a lot less tense than the one with Obi-Wan. In their reunion, they decided that they would stick together, because having your best bud, who was also equatable to having a sibling, around all the time was much better than running solo. The two of them would eventually form their own little crew, not for pirating, but for living life. Anakin's credits made traveling and living a lot easier, and they more or less started a great adventure. Anakin continued wearing the gear, but didn't usually wear the helmet, because he liked being seen, especially as he continued to heal. When he met Luke, it was a complete accident.
Just dive in. Even if you have that inkling to give it a try, just try it. My name is Diana, and I graduated from Southern New Hampshire University. I just didn't know what to expect because I had been out of college for 6 years. The support I received at SMU is incredible. From the minute that I decided I was going to apply until the minute that I...
But they eventually learned that they were related, and it led to a blossoming relationship, one not involving the death of the Lars. It'd be a big family, but Anakin would never meet or learn about his daughter, Leia. Similar to Anakin never seeing Obi-Wan again. Leia lived a fulfilling life, eventually becoming Chancellor of Hosnian Prime for the Alderaanian Alliance, which consisted of various systems from every rim in the galaxy. Obi-Wan lived a long and happy life on Tatooine, and even contributed to the regrowing sect of the Jedi in the galaxy. This new Jedi Order would never have an issue with Crimson Dawn, because on paper, they weren't cruel to people in the same way either of Palpatine's regime were. Crimson Dawn would maintain its power, and Maul would eventually consider making a move on former Imperial territory again. But another galactic conflict would deter him from doing it. The empire he built was economically unstoppable, and all the riches in the galaxy with a nice side of revenge against Sidious were more than enough for him. Despite Crimson Dawn being a criminal syndicate, the influence Anakin had on his rejection of enslavement policies led to it being a system better for the galaxy than either the Empire or the Republic. Without a domineering political landscape that shredded any hope of progress, Crimson Dawn representatives worked on behalf of Maul to maintain economic stability and persevering alliances across the galaxy for decades and eventually centuries to come. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons: Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jack Silver, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lyndall Asher, Smoobs, There Are Cars, Darth Fishgate, Seju Jagger, Groot 36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, General Alexander, Robin Roberts, Blackie Chan, Django Fat Clone, Nick 59.
My friend recently asked me for some money, and I was like, why aren't you using Empower? When I need cash and my paycheck is gone, I just use Empower, and you should too.
Decoy, who he thinks is 14, says, oh yeah.
Decoy says, oh yeah, for sure. Send it on over. Oh yeah. Can't wait to see you in person.
Ooh. True Sweet Guy 69 sends her a picture of his genitals. How you doing? I should have a seat right over there.
How you doing? Why? Bill handshake. He's back there trying to peek at her. Where'd she go? Well, I'm just trying to. His mom was blown. He looked back there, and Chris was staring at him, and all of a sudden, it was like 14 monitors back there. And you could hear the control cameras going. It looked like he's like the Wizard of Oz looking behind the screen. Take a seat, Raymundo.
We're talking. Want to come in later? And who are you talking online?
I'll be a little bit funny.
Yeah, just tell me. I don't know what I tell her. The evil. Let me the checkpoint real quick.
It's like, if he's hitting his head, that does have the deteriorating going to have
Oh, from pull-ups?
Yeah, it's like his hairline is already fading away. It's still there, but you can see it's like it's
yeah.
shaved and it looks like that.
What?
Hey, man, look at the cow. I'm curious.
I'm washing up clothes today.
Oh, that's really paid George on the
Okay.
Okay. More.
Okay.
Sir, George probably never looked like that.
That's why I'm not gonna do it.
George.
He was really talking online with a different decoy, a member of the online watchdog group, Reported Justice, which Dateline hired to do what they normally do.
It is her hair. That's a picture of her. I mean, I swear.
Imps.
It's a wig still. Yeah, that is. Mary's probably watched that. It's a wig. All the comments are going to be, whenever I'm wrong about something, someone's like, actually, my hair. Yeah, you're wrong because of I do the same thing. I gotta be like, okay, fine. I was wrong. I did wrong, but it happens constantly.
And how old is that young lady? She said she was 14, sir. 14. And how old are you?
24, sir.
24.
Yes. Yeah, I've always been very forthcoming with all the information. It's like, yeah, underage. For sure.
And you thought that was appropriate. Why?
Well, I don't know, sir. I just thought it was.
I asked him about the picture of it.
What do you mean? Wait, why do you think?
Thought it was all right.
Why do you think it was all right?
That's strange.
Yeah.
Oh, who told you that? Where you bring him in? Kevin. Whoever Kevin is out there.